Gerber, and I am with Conservation Nebraska. I'm an AmeriCorps member with the Common Ground program that Conservation Nebraska sponsors. So our program is, we do this. We host events on environmental issues across the state of Nebraska to increase education and environmental awareness. So yeah, we've got a presentation here today from Dr. Shannon Bartelt-Hunt. Thank you so much for joining us, Shannon. And so our work with Conservation Nebraska and Common Ground, you can follow us along on Facebook, on our Facebook page at Conservation Nebraska. And I'm also going to put our Facebook group in the chat here. I'll link to that. That is our Conservation Nebraska Northeast Region group. So we kind of talk about environmental issues in the Northeast region of Nebraska and worldwide, as well as sharing these events and some of the projects that we're working on. So if you're interested in following along, join us there or at Conservation Nebraska. And at the end of this webinar, we ask that you fill out a survey for us. It'll be linked once you exit the webinar. That just helps us kind of keep track of how we're doing and so that we can get grant money for next year to continue this program. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Shannon here, and we'll get talking about water quality.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Maddie. I'm going to share some slides that I prepared and just wanted to thank everybody for coming on this evening. We had originally hoped this would be a live event, but this is the next best thing under the circumstances. So I am happy to talk today about nutrients and Nebraska's water quality. I'll also just mention that the host would like the questions to be entered into the Q&A. So you'll see in your Zoom window, you have a Q&A button. I think you can click on that and then enter any questions that you have. And then at the end of the presentation, which is not super long, I have about 15 slides, and then I'll have plenty of time to answer questions that you might have. So again, my name is Shannon Bartelt-Hunt. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UNL, and my research interests focus on water quality. So I'm going to talk about a program that we've run for now. We're in our third year of measuring nutrients across the state of Nebraska. And so the first thing I just want to talk about is what are nutrients. We use nutrients primarily nitrate and phosphate in fertilizer. We need to apply nutrients to soil for plant growth. But as we're probably all aware, when we apply either excess nutrients or if those nutrients are applied and then it rains, they can be washed off of the soil and they can be carried into our water supply. And so when we have a lot of agricultural production, we have a lot of potential for these nutrients to be carried into our surface water and our groundwater. That's can be problematic both from an environmental perspective. So excess nutrients can lead to impacts like algae blooms and excess nutrients in terms of nitrate. If we have nitrate in our water in excess of the drinking water standard, that can also lead to negative health outcomes for us as well. This figure over here on the other side of the slide just shows a nitrogen flux. So you can kind of think of that as a mass of nitrogen that passes through watersheds within a year. And you can see that for us in Nebraska, we're in an area of very high nitrogen flux because we have a lot of nutrients applied to our soils and our cropland. So a little bit more on how nutrients enter water. This is a figure that just shows a lot of different ways that a lot of contaminants can enter our environment. But nutrients can enter from a lot of sources, not just agricultural sources, but here you can see they can enter surface water through surface runoff. So they're applied to soil, and then when it rains, they can be carried in that runoff water to surface water. They can also be transported down into the ground, into the soil and down to our groundwater aquifers. They can come from other sources as well. So there can be an industrial inputs of nitrogen. Water treatment plants could be a source of nitrogen into our surface water. urban areas, we apply fertilizer to our lawns, just like we apply to cropland. And so agriculture is not the only source of nitrates that we can have in the environment. So I think this slide is interesting because it shows for our state kind of the potential risk and amount of nitrogen that can impact our aquifers. So we're also very interested in nitrate in our groundwater as well as our surface water, because a lot of us in Nebraska use groundwater as our drinking water supply. So across the whole US, 15 million households use private wells for drinking water. And about 20% of those private wells are estimated to have at least one contaminant present at a level above a US EPA approved limit. And so certainly one take-home message, if you have a private well that you use for drinking water, it's very important to conduct yearly testing of the water quality in your well. If you have questions about that, that's something we can talk about in the Q&A after the presentation. But what the colors across the US show you is red and yellow, or sorry, red and this orange show areas where you have high nitrogen inputs. Both of those are high nitrogen inputs, but red also means a high aquifer vulnerability or high potential for those nitrates to infiltrate down to our groundwater. And orange is a lower potential for those nitrates to contaminate our aquifer. The yellow and green are a lower nitrogen inputs, and then again, areas of high aquifer vulnerability or areas of low aquifer vulnerability. So one thing you see about the state of Nebraska is a very large swath of it is in that red zone. And so we do have quite a few areas where we have not high nitrogen input, and then also well-drained soils where you have a lot of potential for, or shallow groundwater where you have a lot of potential for that nitrate to impact our water supply. So it's really important that we can track water quality across the state. And we actually have some robust monitoring. NRDs monitor groundwater. The state of Nebraska, NDEE, monitors our groundwater. Even with all of this monitoring, we still have some areas where we don't have good water quality information. So this is a map with nitrate plotted by township. So each square or each one of those pixels is a different township. And this is data from 1997 to 2016, showing the median nitrate concentration in those water samples, well water samples. But any area that's gray is an area where they don't have any water quality information. And that's over a, almost 30-year period. So that's an issue. Another thing that you can see from this map is that we do have areas with elevated nitrate in our groundwater. So the drinking water limit for nitrate is 10 parts per million. So any of the areas that are in this dark orange, the red, or the purple would be areas where the median concentration exceeds that 10 milligram per liter drinking water standard. So because we have these areas without a lot of information, we started a program in 2018 to measure nitrate and also another nutrient, phosphate, in private wells and also in surface water. We started in eastern Nebraska, but since then we've really expanded the program to be statewide. So far, since 2018, so we ran it in 2018, we ran it in 2019, so from 2 years, and then we're planning for our program in 2020, we've recruited almost 200 individuals across the state who've measured almost 200 surface water samples and 140 groundwater samples. And so the way that people find us and the way that people can sign up is by going to this website, go.unl.edu/WQCS. I will mention that again. If I forget at the end, I'll flip back to the slide if people want to write it down. You can sign up to join our testing program, and we do some in-person trainings with large groups. We've worked with Conservation Nebraska on some in-person trainings, and we also have some YouTube videos, which you can link to from the site, that train you how to collect water quality data. And then you can go out and collect it. We have some kind of windows, sampling windows, when we send people test kits, we ask them to go out and collect water quality near where they live. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to show you results that we've collected, but first I'm just going to talk a little bit about the test. Usually when we do these presentations, we can bring the test, and you can bring your own water sample and analyze it on the spot. Unfortunately, we can't do that today, but I can tell you a little bit about how the testing works, and then you can always sign up or contact me to test your water. So these are really simple tests. They're basically strips of paper, and they have two reactive pads on them. One measures for nitrite, which is a different form of nitrogen, and the bottom one measures nitrate. You dip the strip into your water sample. So you might collect, if you have a private well, you might collect water from your faucet. If you're collecting a surface water, you could just collect a cup of water nearby, or if you're collecting from a well, same thing, you could collect the water sample in just any kind of container, as long as you know that it's clean. You dip the strip into the water, and then you just hold it flat for 60 seconds. And during that 60-second period, the color on the strip is going to change. And then you match up the pad color to a chart that's in our instructions, and it's just matching the color. And so you read this pad, you read to the nitrate strip. So here you would say the closest color would be 0.3 parts per million nitrite, and then the nitrate strip you read, and again, it would most closely match to this pad of 5 parts per million. We send you the instructions, and then you can either send us back your data in the mail, or we have a website where you can enter your results directly from your cell phone or from a computer, and then it populates a map where you can see your data along with everyone else who's tested in the program. I'm also going to show you some phosphate results. So we send you 2 test strips. The second one is a phosphate test strip. It works exactly the same way, where you submerge your strip in the water, same water sample you would dip both strips into. This one you hold for 45 seconds, and then again, you read it against the color pad. And so, for example, here, this pad would match to the 5 milligram per liter phosphate. So just showing you some results of the data that we've collected. So there's kind of a lot going on here. This is showing you well water for nitrate across the eastern, I'm kind of getting into little more central Nebraska. Each one of these, the colors of these dots, first of all, each dot corresponds to a measurement that a citizen scientist muted myself. Thank you very much. So the dark red and kind of medium red dots, which are the ones that are larger here, so they've kind of been blown up so you can see them better. They are at or exceeding the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million of nitrate. And then the orange circles are 5 parts per million, yellow is 2, and green is below 2. So yellow dots, there's some data that nitrate concentrations of 2 parts per million can have some health consequences, especially for groups like children. So we're interested in levels 2 and above, but the drinking water standard is 10 parts per million. So again, just talking about our data over the past couple of years, you can see at the bottom that the number of samples that have exceeded the drinking water standard cumulatively is about 20%. So it varies each time we've done our testing. In 2018, it was about 30%. In summer of 19, it was 13% overall. Taking that all together, it's about 20%. And that's consistent with other reports, data collected by NDEE, and that gives us some confidence that the information that our testers are collecting is really accurate. Here's information on nitrate in surface water. So the dots are smaller. A lot of times nitrate concentration in surface water can be lower. And so here again, the colors again map to the same concentrations. Something that's interesting that we really didn't set out to investigate, but something that we looked at through the data was there effect of the flooding in 2018, or I'm sorry, early 2019 on our water quality. So we looked at our data that we got from 2018 and compared it to 2019. If I just go back one slide and you look at these bar charts, you see that the fraction of the samples in 2018 that was below 2 parts per million was greater than we saw in 2019. And so that means overall, possibly that floodwater was pushing nitrate down into the subsurface, and we had more wells that were contaminated in 2019. And then if you look at the surface water data, it's the reverse, but to me that makes sense. Again, we had a larger fraction of our wells in 2019 being below 2 parts per million nitrate. And I think that's more of a dilution issue, so that it was pushing the nitrate in the soil down, but that floodwater was kind of diluting out the nitrate that was sitting in the water on the soil surface, and those floodwaters, you know, of course, diluted out the water that was present in our surface water bodies. In terms of phosphate, we saw, again, phosphate concentrations between 0 and 30 or 50, 50 parts per million. There's not a health-based standard for phosphate, but phosphate can lead to algae growth and some other environmental health issues with our waters. If we have excess algae, that can cause the oxygen in our water to be consumed, and then that water is not suitable for fish and other aquatic species. So we want to limit phosphate in our water as well, but there's not really a health-based standard for phosphate. So our future plans. Originally, our plan was to do another sampling window in May, and so I was going to ask anyone interested to sign up for our May sampling. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, we've had to cancel that sampling window, but so we are shifting our attention to September. So we'd like to have anyone interested in participating still go ahead and sign up, and we'll contact you about testing in September. Again, to sign up, you can go to this website, go.unl.edu/WQCS. And what's really great, as maybe you can see from some of this data, is that when we continue to monitor year after year, it can tell us something about the water quality across Nebraska over time and how it's changing. So with that, I'm just going to acknowledge a few of my collaborators who've worked with me on the project, and then this gives us plenty of time for questions in the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and open, I'll stop my screen share, and then I'll go ahead and open the Q&A. Sure, okay, so there was one question. Would you give us definitions for phosphate, nitrate, and nitrite in layperson's terms? Yes. So nitrate and nitrite are both different forms of nitrogen. So nitrate is a nitrogen with 3 oxygen molecules, and nitrite has 2 oxygen molecules. But these are essentially the nitrogen in that nitrate is a nutrient that's needed by plants. It's needed, we need some nitrate, but when you have excess nitrate, it can lead to health effects. Phosphate is also, again, a phosphorus atom surrounded by 4 oxygens, and again, so PO4 is the chemical formula, and again, it's something that plants need for growth. But again, when you have excess phosphate, it can become an environmental contaminant. The next question is, can we help to collect groundwater in multiple locations? Yes, you can. So this is one great thing about this program, is that when you sign up, you can indicate how many tests you'd like to receive, and we'll send out as many test kits as you'd like to receive. Each test kit has one nitrate strip and one phosphate strip. And then you can go out in our testing window to as many locations as you'd like to test different locations. And you can test both surface water and groundwater. All that we ask is that you share the data either through the website or by sending in your form, so that we can put all this data together to get an idea of water quality across the state. The next question is, what health risks are associated with high levels of nitrate, nitrite, and phosphate? So that's a great question. So the contaminant that has the most significant health risk is nitrate. The health outcome that's most commonly associated with nitrate is called blue baby syndrome or methaglobinemia. Basically, if you consume too much nitrate, and this happens most with infants or small children, if you consume too much nitrate, it can prevent oxygenation of your blood, and that can lead to health consequences. There's also some studies that show other kinds of health outcomes kind of correlated to nitrate, things like certain types of cancers, but there's not the health data, or the health level is really set mostly on the methaglobinemia. Phosphate, there isn't a human health impact associated with phosphate exposure. It's really more focused on environmental health, algae growth, and the subsequent consumption of all the oxygen in the water, which can lead to fish kills and certain types of fish species or other kinds of organisms not being able to live in the water. The next question is, are there any cities in Nebraska that need to remove these chemicals in our drinking water, like Des Moines? So that's a great question. I think that, as maybe for some that are not quite as familiar, so the Des Moines Waterworks has a kind of special treatment system that they have to turn on when nitrate gets very high in the water that's coming into their drinking water plant. And it's very expensive for the city to operate that treatment system. And it actually led to a few years ago, which was subsequently dismissed, basically saying that the producers, the farmers that were contributing that nitrate, should help cover the cost of the removal. I think that our biggest issue with nitrate in Nebraska is, or the area that I'm the most concerned with, is our drinking water treatment plants are removing nitrate to below the drinking water limit. I have a real concern about people on private wells, especially if those individuals are not testing their water routinely. There may need to be, they may need to test it more routinely, or have in-home treatment installed, which again can be expensive for the homeowner. The next question is, would you prioritize what locations you're interested in? We're really interested in water quality across the entire state, both surface water and groundwater. There's really no place that we're not interested in water quality. One thing that's nice about the map and the website that we have, which I didn't show today, but you can actually go in and see other people's data. So what a lot of our citizen scientists are doing is actually going in and seeing where other people are collecting data, and then maybe going to some different locations, which is really cool. But yeah, we're interested in water quality everywhere. So if anyone's interested from their own wells or surface water near their home, that would be great to have people test. The next question is, the effects of high concentrations of nutrients contribute to eutrophication and algae blooms. What's the most common process to decrease the concentration in nutrients? So I think that, in terms of landscape processes, there are some best management practices that people use. So filter strips grass, grass strips. So having grass areas between cropland and water supplies can filter out nutrients. You can have uptake of nutrients by plants. So you could use constructed wetlands or natural wetlands to take up some of those nutrients. But when the nitrate is in the soil, then if it's not used up by plants, it becomes it's kind of difficult to remove at that point. So it just keeps moving down lower and lower into the soil. And so it's really, there are some effective landscape processes, but it's also thinking about applying it at the most effective time, not applying excess, and just making sure we're applying the nutrients that are needed for crop growth, but not in excess. The next question is, do cities like Omaha already test for these? Yes, they do. So your public water supply in a city that's supplying water tests that water every day for a very large number, not just nutrients, but different organic chemicals, metals, bacteria. So your water supply, I live in Omaha, I drink the water, it's very safe. And in all communities, there's EPA requirements for water testing. So I feel really strongly about the safety of that water, and actually there are cost and waste issues associated with bottled water. There's actually a lot less testing of bottled water. So I would encourage people to drink their tap water. How accurate do you feel the test strips are? Yeah, so this is a really good question. So how accurate are the test strips? So if you go back to, or think back to the picture I showed you, these are, they're colorimetric tests, and each box is a different discrete value. We've done some accuracy testing, and people are accurate, and Becky, I'll share my contact information if you'd like. We actually published a paper on this, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it more. But basically, people are accurate with these test strips if they've been trained. And by accurate, we define plus or minus one of those boxes. Does that make sense? So if you choose a box, the one above or the one below, we counted that as being accurate. And I would say 80+% of the time. So with proper training, I think people can be fairly accurate. But really following up, if this is your home water supply, my recommendation would be, if you use a test strip, which is a good first test because it's inexpensive, and it would test at 10 or above 10, I would certainly follow that up with a confirmatory test at a contract laboratory. The next question is, would a dead animal affect water quality? Yes, it can. It could affect water quality. It can release nutrients. It could release bacteria into the water. This is, essentially why we treat surface water before we drink it. It wouldn't have an effect on groundwater because any water at the surface is, would be kind of filtered as it moved through the riverbank, but it certainly could affect surface water quality. The next question is, does the state have a way for private well owners to get their water tested regularly? There's some guidance from both the university and from the state Department of Health and Human Services and NDEE on how regular to test your water. So the recommendation is that you test your water every year. There's a recommendation that you do a nitrate test and also a bacterial test. There's not really a testing program that the state runs, but they have some information for well owners to find a lab that could test your water. I'm also happy to be a resource and help you find a lab and give some input on what tests would be the important ones to have run. And there's some extension information, again, that I could share out with Conservation Nebraska about how to do that. What are the tests that you want to do and what frequency for private wells? The question is, does city test surface water sites like ponds, lakes, and Pepio Creek, and is there a value with testing the sites? Yes, that they do test surface water quality. I think there is a value associated with that. One, we can use surface water as a public water supply. We more commonly use groundwater in Nebraska, but there are locations that use surface water. Council Bluffs, for example, uses a blend of Missouri River water and groundwater. And yeah, there is a value in testing the sites because it gives you information about the quality of the surface water, which we don't directly drink, but we recreate in. We go boating, fishing, swimming, and if we don't test the water, we could be exposed to contaminants. And so municipalities test surface water sites for nutrients, but also the real concern with fishing, swimming, etc., is bacterial testing. Becky said, just a fun fact, community water supplies test for 90 or so different contaminants. Yes, per the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, that's absolutely correct. So there's a lot of testing that's done on a community water supply, much more so than is done on your bottled water, which is actually not governed by EPA, but is regulated or tested through FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And a lot of times bottled water, which you're paying a premium for, is sometimes the same coming from a community water supply. So I guess just another plug for the safety of your water. The next question is this data correlated with other data? We haven't started doing that yet, but that's a really good suggestion. One thing that we are also interested in correlating the data to, especially the groundwater data, is well depth. So we're interested in, is there a difference in nitrate concentration with the depth of the well? And Becky also pointed out she's an extension person, wonderful, for Nebraska and supply contact information. That would be fantastic. I would love to have it and chat with you, Becky, after, so we can connect, and I'm sure others will as well. The next question is, does this study look at any heavy metals? We are not focusing on metals, just looking at nutrients, and in some prior work, we've also looked at atrazine. There's not a strip test, but a test that is similar to like a home pregnancy test that you can use for atrazine. And we've also used that in some of our testing programs. Okay, looks like that is the end of the open questions. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments. If not, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone this evening and taking some time to talk about water quality. I have I do not have my contact information in the slide, but I'm going to, I think everyone can see the chat. I'll enter my email into the chat. And my name. So I'd be happy to chat with anyone afterwards. Oh, a couple more questions coming up. Another question, what kind of water would most likely be contaminated? So between surface water and groundwater, surface water is more likely to be contaminated because it's more impacted by runoff and by everything that's happening on the land surface. So groundwater is a preferred water supply source. The only issue with groundwater is just when we have private wells, they don't have the same kind of testing requirements that we do for a community supply. So we have a lot of communities that use groundwater, but they're testing that water more frequently. So groundwater still can be contaminated, but it's not as impacted by the land surface activity because the soil basically serves as a natural filter. The next question is, enhanced biological phosphorus removal, or AMOX, is a good process to increase the quality of water. Yes, it can be, certainly, in a wastewater treatment plant. And so there are, a number of different techniques that we use in wastewater treatment plants to remove phosphorus, remove nutrients from our water. And then, yeah, a question about interest in helping with this fall study. And yes, I can help with finding water supplies. Really, we're interested in any and all water quality information. So if there are certain water areas that you're interested in that are near where you live, that would be great. And if you would like to get some help in identifying a place to test, we'd be happy to help you with that as well. And then Becky entered her contact info, and maybe that could be shared into the chat for everyone to see. Great. Gosh, just got another question or comment about this September testing. And so, yeah, that would be wonderful. Please reach out via my email, and we can, we do have people that do a lot of testing in the program. We're happy to supply them with more test kits. So another question asking, should individuals be worried about their own impact on water, such as using fertilizers, or is the main issue farming industry? It's region dependent. So urban runoff can be a large impact on water supply as well. In the Omaha area, it's certainly in Lincoln and areas where we have a lot of people, applying chemicals to their lawns. If you look across the entire state, the agricultural application is going to be bigger, but in localized areas, yeah, those inputs can also matter. Everything that we can do as individuals to help, protect our water quality, I think, is important. So yeah, it's something we also want to look at our own individual impacts on water supply as well. And that was the last question, and happy to answer more if there are others.
Yeah, so as we wrap up here, feel free to put your last couple of questions in the Q&A. But otherwise, you can follow along with Conservation Nebraska. We host events like this and other events on soil health, on cover cropping. We've got events coming up on thinking about the floods and systems perspective on that. So follow along on our Conservation Nebraska Facebook page. And for those of you in the Northeast region of Nebraska, you can join us in the Northeast Nebraska Conservation Nebraska Northeast Region group. I'm going to link that in the chat here. We kind of talk about the events that we're going to be hosting. We have a book club. We talk about some of the projects that we work on in this area of Nebraska. Yeah, so we'd love to see some of y'all in the group. And otherwise, thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. And Shannon, you gave us some really great information. Thanks so much for presenting for us.
Happy to do it. Thanks for the invitation.